How do we know if Bitcoin is succeeding? Most people would answer that question with a number. Bitcoin has crossed $100,000. Bitcoin has fallen 30%. Bitcoin has reached a new all-time high. The conversation almost always comes back to price. And I understand why. Price is easy to see. It's measurable. It's reported every day. It gives us a simple way to judge something that is otherwise quite difficult to understand. But the longer I've spent studying Bitcoin, the more I find myself wondering whether price is really the best way to measure its success. Bitcoin is now around 17 years old. That alone is remarkable. When it first appeared in 2009, many people dismissed it as an experiment that would never survive. Over the years, it has been called a scam, a bubble, a Ponzi scheme, and countless other things besides. Yet here it is. It has survived exchange collapses, government hostility, media ridicule, internal disagreements, and multiple bear markets. That doesn't mean it can't fail. It still could. There are risks that we can identify and probably many more that we can't. But 17 years later, I think it's fair to say that Bitcoin has achieved something. Question is, what exactly? Most people would say the answer is obvious. Look at the price. But I've come to think that price may be telling us less than we assume. After all, price is simply the result of supply and demand. That's true of houses, it's true of shares, it's true of gold, and it's true of Bitcoin. Prices don't create demand, they reflect it. So, if Bitcoin's price is rising over long periods of time, perhaps the more interesting question is not what the price is doing. Perhaps the more interesting question is why more people want to own it. That shifts the discussion away from price and towards adoption. Now, adoption is one of those words that gets thrown around a lot, but what does it actually mean? To me, adoption isn't simply hearing about Bitcoin, and it isn't necessarily owning a small amount either. Real adoption happens when Bitcoin starts becoming part of someone's financial life. Perhaps they begin saving in it, perhaps they use it, perhaps they start viewing it as something more than a speculative investment. That's why I think adoption is much harder to measure than most people assume. Almost everyone has heard of Bitcoin. Far fewer have taken the time to understand it, and fewer still have reached a point where it influences how they think about money, savings, or investing. We have seen this sort of process before. Take mobile phones as an example. There was a time when people genuinely believed they didn't need one. The phone at home worked perfectly well. Life functioned. Nobody felt deprived because they had never experienced the alternative. Then slowly, over time, expectations changed. What started as a convenience became a necessity. Today, it's difficult to imagine living without a mobile phone. Looking backwards, the process feels inevitable. Living through it, it never does. And that's one reason I think people often misunderstand Bitcoin. They assume that if it hasn't already achieved mass adoption, then perhaps it never will. History suggests that major changes rarely happen that way. They usually happen gradually. Then suddenly they appear obvious. But Bitcoin faces the challenge that mobile phones never had. Mobile phones are competing against inconvenience. Bitcoin is competing against money itself. Most people don't spend much time thinking about money. They think about earning it, spending it, saving it, trying to make enough of it. But very few people spend their evenings questioning the monetary system underneath society. Money is one of those things that becomes almost invisible. It's part of the environment, like electricity, like running water, like the foundations of a house. Most people don't think about the foundations while the house is standing. Only when cracks begin to appear do they start looking down. I think something similar happens with money. For many people, Bitcoin only becomes interesting after they start questioning money itself. Why does purchasing power decline over time? Why does everything seem to get more expensive? Why is saving becoming more difficult? Could money work differently? That process is important because I suspect adoption begins with education. People learn, they question, they explore alternatives. Then they discover Bitcoin. And only then does adoption become possible. That's why I think the relationship between price and adoption is so often misunderstood. In the short term, the two can move in completely different directions. Bitcoin can fall 50% while adoption continues to grow. Bitcoin can double in price while adoption barely changes. Markets are noisy, speculation is powerful. But over longer periods of time, I would expect adoption and price to remain connected. As more people learn about Bitcoin, some will adopt it. As adoption grows, demand grows. And as demand grows against a fixed supply, eventually that tends to find its way into the price. Which brings me back to the original question. How do we know if Bitcoin is succeeding? My answer today is that price matters, but it isn't the whole story. Price is the scoreboard, adoption is the game. And the longer I study Bitcoin, the more convinced I become that the deeper story is not what the price is doing today. The deeper story is how many people are slowly moving through the process of learning about money, understanding Bitcoin, and deciding that it deserves a place in their financial lives. Whether that ultimately leads to Bitcoin becoming a widely adopted form of money, nobody can know for certain. But if you ask me where I think the evidence points, I believe it points in that direction. Not because of the price, because of the process underneath it. Because adoption rarely arrives all at once. It grows one person at a time, one conversation at a time, and one discovery at a time. And from where I sit, that process still appears to be moving forward. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. How do you measure Bitcoin's success? Is it the price? Or is it the adoption happening underneath? Let me know in the comments.